Right now, the most scientifically accurate thing we can say about the universe is that it absolutely shouldn't be here.
Right. It really shouldn't.
I mean, think about it. Just look around wherever you are right now. Absolute nothingness requires absolutely no energy. It requires zero laws of physics, no cosmological constants, no quantum fields.
No explanation whatsoever.
Exactly. It's the ultimate fictionless state. It is, by all logic, the default. And yet, here you are, you're sitting in a room or, commuting on a train, anchored to the floor by gravity, breathing this hyper-specific mixture of gases and listening to this deep dive.
And we just treat it all as totally normal.
Yeah, it's just the default setting, right? The background noise of our lives. But the sheer brute fact that reality exists at all, that there is an is instead of an isn't, is arguably the most deeply unsettling, astonishing mystery we could possibly ever confront.
It really is. And the crazy part is, we spend our entire lives so utterly immersed in the mechanics of reality, figuring out how it all operates, that we develop this total blindness to the actual fact of reality itself.
We're so preoccupied with arranging the furniture that we never stop to ask why there is a room to begin with.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Which is exactly the terrain we are navigating today. We are going straight down to the bedrock. We're going to unpack the insights of two huge philosophical figures, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz and Martin Heidegger, to understand how we became so completely numb to the miracle of existence.
And crucially, how we might actually go about waking ourselves back up to it.
Right. So we need to start with Leibniz, because back in the 17th century, he somehow managed to crystallize this entire overwhelming mystery into a single razor-sharp question.
He did. He asked, why is there something rather than nothing?
It's such a simple string of words, but it hits so hard.
It does. It's deceptively simple, really. But Leibniz wasn't just, throwing out some poetic riddle for people to ponder at dinner parties. He arrived at this question through a very rigorous metaphysical framework, primarily driven by what he called his principle of sufficient reason.
Right, the principle of sufficient reason. For anyone who spends time in the philosophical weeds, that principle is practically the gravitational force of Leibniz's entire worldview, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's the engine of his philosophy. Basically, it's the idea that there are no unanchored facts. Nothing happens without a reason that explains why it is exactly this way and not, some other way.
Like, if there's a puddle on the floor, there has to be a reason. The roof leaked, or someone spilled a glass of water. It didn't just magic itself into existence.
Exactly. But we need to grasp how aggressively Leibniz applied this. He didn't just apply it to isolated everyday events like a puddle. He applied it to the totality of existence itself.
Okay, so how does he make that leap?
Well, Leibniz categorized reality into two buckets, contingent things and necessary things. Contingent things are basically everything that exists but didn't strictly have to exist.
Meaning there's no logical contradiction in them not being there?
Right. There is no logical contradiction in imagining a universe where, say, you were never born, or where the Earth didn't form, or where the specific parameters of the Big Bang were just slightly altered, resulting in a lifeless void of cold gas.
So you, me, the microphones we're talking into, the listeners' headphones, all contingent.
Yes. The entire observable universe, as a collection of matter, energy, and physical laws, is completely contingent.
But wait, trying to wrap my head around this, isn't asking why existence exists kind of an impossible loop?
How do you mean?
I mean, we are using a brain made of contingent matter, governed by contingent laws of physics, sitting inside this contingent universe to demand an explanation for the universe. It feels like trying to bite your own teeth.
That's a fantastic image, and yeah, it is a dizzying loop. But that vertigo, that dizzy feeling, is actually a feature of the question, not a bug. Leibniz argued that if the entire chain of physical reality is contingent, you cannot satisfy that principle of sufficient reason by just pointing to an earlier contingent event.
Because then you're just kicking the can down the road.
Exactly. You can't just say, well, the Earth exists because of a solar nebula, and the nebula exists because of prior star deaths, infinitely backward. An infinite chain of contingent things is still collectively contingent. It doesn't explain itself.
It still requires an outside explanation.
Right. So Leibniz concluded you eventually hit a metaphysical wall. You need an ultimate ground, a necessary being that carries the reason for its own existence within itself.
Which, for Leibniz, was God.
Yes, exactly. And he famously argued that nothing is simpler and easier than something.
Nothing is simpler and easier than something. The logic of that phrase is just devastating when you really think about it.
It really is. Nothing requires absolutely zero justification.
Yeah.
Something demands a massive, incomprehensible amount of justification.
Because when you strip away our everyday biases and really try to conceptualize absolute nothingness, I mean, no space, no time, no quantum foam, no consciousness at all.
Just a true bottomless void.
Yeah. When you picture that, you realize how infinitely improbable our current situation actually is. It reminds me of walking into a complex avant-garde film that's already halfway over.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, so imagine you sit down in the theater and you are desperately trying to analyze the characters, the lighting, the strange dialogue. You really want to understand the mechanics of the plot, and science is phenomenal at analyzing that movie, right?
Science maps out all the scenes and the rules of the world on screen.
Exactly. But Leibniz isn't looking at the screen at all. He is the guy sitting next to you in the dark, turning to you and asking, why is there a theater? Why is there a projector? Why are we sitting here watching anything instead of just sitting in the void?
That analogy works perfectly to distinguish between science and metaphysics. Science maps the internal logic of the reality we find ourselves in. Metaphysics asks why there is a screening in the first place. When you genuinely internalize that there could have just been no theater, no movie, no anything, the physical cosmos completely stops feeling like a given. It transforms into this profoundly strange brute fact.
So, if this is the most fundamental question a human being can possibly formulate, I have to ask, why aren't we walking around completely paralyzed by wonder all the time?
It's a very fair question.
I mean, why did I spend 20 minutes this morning legitimately angry that I couldn't find my keys instead of, weeping with awe that keys, metal, spatial dimensions, and gravity exist at all?
Well, the short answer is the psychological necessity of what phenomenologists call gradual immersion. We do not enter the world with the cognitive equipment of a philosopher.
You don't come out quoting Leibniz.
No, we arrive as highly vulnerable, completely helpless infants. Kindness doesn't just click on like a spotlight. It is a very slow, incremental dawn of sensory acquisition, linguistic mapping, and social modeling.
So we basically acclimate to reality the way you acclimate to a hot bath. You adapt to the temperature slowly until you don't even feel the heat anymore.
Yes, exactly. But the mechanism goes even deeper than just simple acclimation. We learn what the world is based on how we use it.
How we use it.
Yeah, our primary engagement with reality isn't theoretical contemplation. We aren't just staring at things, it's practical manipulation. Over time, through constant practical engagement, the world actually grows functionally transparent.
Transparent in the sense that we look right past the object itself and only see its utility. Like, we only see what it does for us.
You nailed it. A chair ceases to be this baffling, highly specific arrangement of wood and metal atoms suspended in physical space. It just becomes for sitting.
A road is just for driving.
Right. Practical familiarity aggressively dulls our capacity for ontological wonder. The deeper question of why this entire network of stuff exists just completely slips from view. Because the bare demands of living require us to ignore the strangeness of the tools we are using.
There is a fantastic thought experiment from the research that completely strips away this gradual immersion.
Oh, the awakening scenario.
Yes. Imagine, just for a second, absolute blackness, dead silence. And then instantaneously you awaken. But you don't wake up as a baby. You awaken as a fully formed adult with zero memories, no prior experiences, no childhood acclimation at all.
You're just totally fresh.
Right, thrust instantly into a functioning reality. Imagine you are suddenly standing on a sidewalk in a modern metropolis. The ambient sound design alone would crash over you. Blaring horns, the screech of brakes, thousands of overlapping voices.
That would be deafening.
You look up and see these towering, impossible geometric structures scraping the sky. Giant metal boxes are hurling past you on these ribbons of asphalt. People are swarming around you, making rhythmic noises with their mouths, following completely unspoken, invisible rules of social coordination.
You're communicating, but to you, it's alien.
Exactly. And then you look down and see your own hands. Skin, veins, articulating joints. If you spawned into that reality without 30 years of gradual habituation to numb you to it, you would be utterly terrified.
Beyond terrified.
The organization of matter into these wildly specific forms wouldn't feel ordinary at all. It would feel like a full-blown hallucination. It's like nose blindness, but for reality itself. We've been smelling the room for so long we forgot it even has a scent.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. And in that moment of pure disorientation on the sidewalk, Leibniz's question wouldn't be some abstract puzzle for an academic paper. It would hit that individual with visceral, physical force.
You'd be screaming it.
Yes, they would be demanding to know why there is this instead of nothing. Their astonishment is actually the most rational, clear-eyed response to the universe you could possibly have. They aren't clouded by the anesthetic of familiarity.
But because we do have that anesthetic, because we are always already immersed in the world, that spontaneous awakening basically never happens to us.
Which brings us to a critical pivot in the history of thought. Because in the 20th century, the philosopher Martin Heidegger looked at this loss of wonder and realized something alarming.
That it wasn't just a personal psychological quirk.
Exactly. He diagnosed it as a massive historical catastrophe that had completely infected the entire tradition of Western philosophy.
Wow, okay. So Heidegger's 1927 masterwork, Being and Time, it's essentially a rescue mission for the question of existence, right?
It's a perfect description. It is a rescue mission. He argued that we had become entirely obsessed with what he called ontic questions, while completely forgetting the ontological question.
Okay, we need to unpack those terms for the listener. Ontic versus ontological.
That distinction is absolutely paramount.
Yeah.
So ontic questions deal with the specific properties of particular beings within the world.
Give me some examples.
Like, how does a cell divide? What is the mass of a neutron? How do fluctuating interest rates affect inflation?
So the nuts and bolts of daily life in science.
Yes. And we have built an incredibly sophisticated global civilization by answering those ontic questions.
Going back to our movie theater analogy, we are masters of analyzing the movie.
We are the ultimate film critics of reality. But the ontological question is the question of being itself. Capital B, being. Not how things are, but that they are. Why are there beings at all instead of nothing?
Which is Leibniz's question all over again.
Exactly. Heidegger adopted it as the fundamental question of metaphysics. He felt that we had stopped treating the world as a profound mystery and started treating it merely as an inventory of objects, things to be categorized, mastered, and controlled.
And he pointed a finger at a very specific historical figure for this, didn't he?
He did. He traced the root of this great forgetting straight back to the 17th century, specifically to René Descartes.
Ah, Descartes. Now, anyone who follows philosophy knows the immense weight of Descartes' reg cogitans and res extensa. The thinking mind completely split from extended physical matter. It is the core architecture of modern scientific dualism.
Yes, the famous Cartesian divide.
But Descartes' logic has built the modern world. It works incredibly well for physics, for engineering, for medicine. So why did Heidegger view this Cartesian turn as such a disaster for our understanding of existence?
Because Heidegger recognized that Descartes' famous meditative exercise, sitting by the fire, doubting the external world, and retreating into the isolated certainty of I think, therefore I am, was fundamentally artificial.
Artificial how?
Well, Descartes turned human beings into these detached, worldless observers. He framed us as isolated minds trapped inside a dark skull, looking out through the camera lenses of our eyes at a completely separate alien world of physical objects.
Right, like we're ghosts driving a meat skeleton.
Exactly. And once you create that massive split between subject and object, the entire philosophical project shifts.
Yeah.
You spend the next 300 years obsessively arguing about epistemology.
Meaning the study of knowledge.
Right. The obsession becomes, how can my internal isolated mind ever reliably prove that the external world of objects actually exists? Truth just gets reduced to a matter of mere correspondence. Does my mental representation accurately match the physical stuff out there?
So we're constantly second-guessing reality.
Yes. And by framing reality this way, Descartes reduced the world to what Heidegger called present at hand, a domain of dead, measurable, extended things just standing opposite to a thinking subject.
Let me try to map this with an analogy for you, the listener, to really visualize what Heidegger is critiquing here. Descartes essentially turned the universe into a massive escape room.
Ooh, an escape room. Let's hear it.
So you are dropped into this escape room, and you are fundamentally separate from the objects in it. Your only job is to coldly, rationally analyze the clues, measure the dimensions, figure out the mechanical linkages, and basically solve reality.
Right, highly detached.
But Heidegger is arguing that the universe is not an escape room. It is a home we are already deeply living in. We aren't separate from the furniture. We are curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, intimately bound up with the space.
We belong there.
Right. Descartes treats us like alien scientists studying a living room through a glass wall, while Heidegger says, no, we are the inhabitants. And the inhabitants' primary relationship to the room isn't measurement, it's dwelling.
The escape room analogy perfectly captures the theoretical detachment Heidegger was fighting against. Heidegger's counter-concept to Descartes' isolated subject is a German term, in der Welt sein. being in the world.
Being in the world.
And the hyphens in that phrase are incredibly intentional. You cannot surgically extract the being from the world. It is a unified primordial phenomenon. Long before we ever adopt the detached stance of a scientist measuring an object, we are already immersed in a heavily contextualized web of meaning.
Which means Descartes' dualism, this totalizing subject-object split, actually obscures our lived reality.
It hides the truth of how we actually exist.
And if the world is just a warehouse of dead objects completely separate from our inner selves, then everything inevitably devolves into raw material. Nature just becomes a resource for technological exploitation. We forget being because we are too busy extracting value from beings.
Yes, that is exactly where Heidegger goes with his critique of technology later in life. And to correct this initial error, Heidegger completely discards the traditional vocabulary. He refuses to use words like human, person, or subject.
Because they're already tainted.
Right, they're deeply infected with Cartesian baggage. So instead, he introduces a new term, Dasein.
Dasein, which translates literally to being there.
Yes, the entity for whom its own being is actually an issue.
Okay, so if we aren't Cartesian minds floating down from the heavens, how exactly does Dasein find itself in this world?
It arrives through a phenomenon Heidegger calls Geworfenheit, or thrownness.
Thrownness. I have to say, that is such a visceral, almost aggressive concept. It completely strips away all the romanticism of birth.
It does. It forces us to confront the brutally unchosen nature of our existence. You do not dictate the terms of your entry into reality. You are thrown into it.
Like a die being rolled.
Exactly. You are thrown into a specific historical epoch, a particular socioeconomic class, a specific biological makeup, and a pre-existing linguistic web. You didn't select your native language, yet that language fundamentally constrains the way you can even conceptualize reality.
You are delivered over to a massive matrix of historical possibilities that you had absolutely zero hand in creating.
It is the ultimate lack of consent.
It really is. I mean, think about it. You listening to this right now, you didn't choose to be listening to this deep dive in this specific, highly volatile era of human history.
You just woke up here.
It is exactly like being dropped into an incredibly complex, massively multiplayer online game, like an MMO that has already been running on the servers for thousands of years before you finally logged in.
Oh, that's a great modern way to frame Geworfenheit.
Yeah, right. You spawn in, and there's no tutorial. The economy is already rigged. The geopolitical factions are fighting wars over borders you don't even recognize. The rules of engagement are deeply entrenched. And you were just forced to figure out how to pilot a character that you didn't even get to design in a character creation menu.
The MMO analogy really highlights the sheer facticity of the situation. The server was running before you, and it will run after you. Thrownness underscores the absolute groundlessness of our being.
We're just free falling into it.
We're thrust into an unchosen situation. Yet, and this is the agonizing irony of Dasein, we are simultaneously held completely responsible for projecting our own possibilities forward. We have to take total ownership of a life we didn't ask for.
Which is an incredibly heavy, dizzying psychological burden. I mean, if we constantly walked around feeling the sheer, ungrounded terror of our own thrownness, we would be paralyzed. We literally couldn't function.
Yeah.
We need a coping mechanism, right? Some kind of shelter from that existential vertigo.
We absolutely do. And that shelter is what Heidegger identifies as Das Man.
Das Man, often translated as the they or the one.
Right. Because the burden of authentic self-creation in the face of thrownness is so overwhelming, Dasein almost always flees from it. We fall into what he calls an inauthentic absorption in everyday social reality.
We hide in the crowd.
Exactly. We stop confronting the mystery of our individual existence, and we simply adopt the anonymous behaviors of the collective.
We do what one does. One goes to college. One gets a mortgage. One holds the acceptable political opinions of their specific demographic. One wears the right clothes to the right events.
Yes. In the realm of Das Man, true individuality is dissolved into averageness. There's a continuous leveling down of all profound questions.
Everything gets flattened.
Das Man dictates what is considered common sense, what is valuable, and what is absurd. And it is crucial we don't just dismiss this as superficial peer pressure, like teenagers wearing the same sneakers. Das Man is the very atmosphere we breathe.
I see where you're going, but let's make sure we don't confuse this with a conscious surrender to a mob. Das Man is far more insidious than that because it isn't an external force threatening you. It is the internal framework of your own daily logic. It is the cultural autopilot.
The autopilot. Tell me more about how you see that.
Well, when a pilot turns on the autopilot in a commercial jet, It isn't a malicious act, right? It keeps the flight smooth, it navigates the pre-planned route, adjusts for turbulence, and prevents a catastrophic crash. It is highly efficient.
Sure.
But while the autopilot is engaged, you aren't actually flying the plane. The programming is flying the plane. You are just sitting in the cockpit watching the instruments blink. Das Man is the social autopilot that prevents us from crashing into the dread of our own thrownness.
That captures the dual nature of Das Man perfectly. It is a protective, necessary shield that allows civilization to function. If everyone was constantly paralyzed by the ontological mystery of existence, if we're all just staring at our hands on the sidewalk, we couldn't maintain infrastructure or raise children.
The power grid would collapse in a day.
Exactly. But the tragic cost of this shield is that we lose our grip on our own existence. We become alienated from our own potential. The radical amazement demanded by Leibniz's question is entirely suffocated by the daily commute, the inbox, the social media feed. Life under Das Man is fundamentally tranquilizing.
So if the autopilot is perfectly designed to keep us tranquilized and functioning, what kind of force is actually required to crack it? If we are so seamlessly embedded in this inauthentic comfort, how do we ever glimpse the underlying machinery of reality again?
Heidegger points to the mundane moments of failure in our everyday lives. He illustrates this with one of the most famous phenomenological examples in 20th century philosophy.
The tool in use.
Yes, often described as the hammer. He asks us to observe a skilled carpenter hammering a nail. In the fluid motion of the work, the carpenter is not staring at the hammer. They aren't analyzing the grain of the wooden handle or calculating the metallurgical properties of the steel head.
The tool essentially vanishes. The carpenter's focus is completely on the cabinet being built or the door being framed. The hammer is just a transparent extension of the body.
This is what Heidegger calls Zuhandenheit, or readiness to hand. When things are functioning properly within our projects, they do not stand out as isolated Cartesian objects. We encounter them purely as equipment within a broader invisible web of meaning.
And he calls that web the referential totality, right?
Yes. The hammer refers to the nail, which refers to the wood, which refers to the construction of a house, which ultimately refers back to Dasein's need for shelter and a place to dwell.
But that entire referential web stays totally invisible as long as everything is working smoothly.
Precisely. But what happens when the hammer actually breaks? The handle splinters, or the steel head flies off, or perhaps the hammer simply goes missing. The exact moment the tool fails, a profound phenomenological shift occurs.
It stops being transparent.
It instantly ceases to be an extension of the carpenter's will. It abruptly obtrudes. It becomes a heavy, useless, obstinate hunk of matter.
It transforms from Zuhandenheit, ready to hand, into Vorhandenheit, present at hand.
Yes. And in that precise moment of breakdown, the world reveals itself. Because the specific tool failed, the entire invisible web of dependencies, that referential totality, suddenly lights up in our awareness.
The hammer is a classic example, obviously, but the modern equivalent, and frankly a much more devastating one for the average person listening today, is a Wi-Fi router.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about it. When you are lying on your couch, completely engrossed in streaming a 4K movie on your tablet, the Wi-Fi is perfectly ready to hand. You never stop to marvel at the miraculous invisible fields of data penetrating the drywall of your home.
You're just watching the movie.
Right. You don't think about the fiber optic lines buried under the Pacific Ocean or the orbital satellites or the massive humming server farms in another hemisphere. You just watch the movie.
It's all completely transparent.
But the absolute second that video buffers and the spinning wheel of death appears on the screen, the illusion shatters. The movie vanishes from your attention. You suddenly stare at the glass and metal of the tablet itself. You look across the room at the plastic router blinking an angry red light.
You're ripped out of the immersion.
You suddenly remember your internet service provider exists. In a fraction of a second, the breakdown of the tool forces you to perceive the massive, fragile, highly contingent infrastructure of reality that you were completely ignoring 3 seconds prior.
The Wi-Fi analogy holds up beautifully, though Heidegger would probably add that this realization of the referential totality is usually fleeting.
Yeah, we reboot the router, the movie resumes, and the world withdraws back into transparency.
The autopilot takes over again.
Right. A broken router is an annoyance. It's a tiny, temporary tear in the fabric of Das Man. But Heidegger argues that there are far more profound systemic breakdowns, doesn't he? Existential disruptions that don't just reveal the infrastructure of our tools, but reveal the fundamental groundlessness of our own being.
This takes us into the realm of fundamental moods, specifically what Heidegger identifies as angst, or anxiety.
We need to tread really carefully here because modern therapeutic language uses anxiety to describe stress, nervousness, or clinical panic disorders. But Heidegger is pointing at something ontologically different than just being stressed out about a work presentation, right?
It's fundamentally different. Heidegger draws a very sharp distinction between fear and angst. Fear is always directed at a specific, identifiable entity within the world.
You're afraid of something.
Yes. You fear a rapidly approaching car. You fear a medical diagnosis. You fear a stock market crash. Fear has a target. Angst, however, has no target. It is not triggered by anything specific within the world.
So what triggers it?
Angst is a diffuse, suffocating unease that creeps up precisely when the everyday world loses its significance.
It's the feeling that the entire referential totality we just talked about, our jobs, our social status, our hobbies, is completely arbitrary. The world doesn't threaten us, it just goes totally flat and meaningless.
Yes. In angst, the familiar world slips away. The comforts of Das Man collapse. You are left suspended, confronting the sheer nothingness that our fragile existence stands out against. Angst pulls you completely out of the herd because no one else can experience your angst for you. It individualizes you.
It strips away the painted backdrop and forces you to look at the empty stage. But even angst is just a mood. It can pass. The ultimate breakdown, the one force that absolutely shatters Das Man permanently, is the authentic confrontation with our own mortality, being toward death.
This is where Heidegger's philosophy reaches its absolute most intense register. Think about how the cultural autopilot, Das Man, handles the concept of death. It handles it through constant aggressive evasion. It domesticates mortality.
How so?
Datum frames death as an objective statistical event that happens to people. We say, yes, everyone dies eventually. We push it into a vague, indefinite future. It is treated as an unfortunate administrative error that happens to other people, never as a defining imminent feature of my own immediate reality.
It is the ultimate distancing tactic. By turning death into a generic biological inevitability, we give ourselves permission to live as though we have infinite time. We trick ourselves into thinking we can always delay the difficult choices.
But Heidegger strips away that evasion by defining death as Dasein's own most non-relational possibility.
Okay, let's unpack that, because own most non-relational possibility is very dense academic phrasing for what is basically a violently personal experience.
It means that death is the one phenomenon in the universe that absolutely isolates you. It is non-relational because you cannot delegate it.
Right.
You can have someone else do your job, you can have someone else pay your taxes, you can share a life with a partner, but no one can die your death for you. It is uncompromisingly yours. When you authentically anticipate this, when you truly grasp that your existence is finite, fragile, and constantly shadowed by its own impossibility, the superficiality of Das Man just evaporates.
I know that telling a listener to deeply reflect on their own inevitable, isolating death sounds incredibly bleak. It feels completely counterintuitive to finding wonder in the world. But the way I've come to synthesize this is through the framework of a project deadline.
A deadline. Okay, lay that out.
So imagine you are handed an incredibly important, complex project at work, but your boss tells you there is no deadline. Just get it done whenever. What inevitably happens?
You do nothing, you put it off.
You drift, you procrastinate, you dabble. The project floats in this vague, indefinite space forever because there is no urgency forcing you to make hard choices.
Right.
But the moment management says, you have exactly 72 hours. Friday at 5 p.m., pencils down, it is over. The entire landscape changes. The deadline forces the project into sharp focus. You instantly stop wasting time on minor, irrelevant details. The deadline gives your choices actual weight.
That makes perfect sense.
Death is the ultimate non-negotiable project deadline. Without authentically facing the deadline of mortality, your life drifts on autopilot. You tell yourself, I'll fix that relationship someday, I'll take that risk someday. But the authentic anticipation of death forces you to realize that someday is a fiction invented by Das Man. You have to choose now. The deadline is the only thing that gives your existence actual stakes.
That synthesis captures the core of what Heidegger calls Entschlossenheit, or resoluteness. Being toward death is not about morbidly obsessing over your physical demise. It is about projecting yourself toward that ultimate limit so that you can bounce back into the present moment and take absolute ownership of your choices. Resoluteness pulls you out of the anonymous herd.
It wakes you up.
Yes. And if we bring this all the way back to the beginning of our deep dive, it is only in this space of resoluteness, this clearing created by the anticipation of death, that Leibniz's question finally regains its terrifying, beautiful urgency.
Because you aren't just asking about the universe in the abstract anymore.
Exactly. When you realize that your specific existence is utterly finite, unchosen, and uniquely yours, you stop asking why the cosmos generally exists. You start asking, why is there my fragile, highly improbable throne existence, rather than nothing? The philosophical puzzle becomes a deeply personal, existential revelation.
It is a remarkable full circle. We started with Leibniz demanding a sufficient reason for why the cosmos isn't just an empty, frictionless void. And then we explored how the gradual, practical immersion of growing up makes us blind to that miracle, turning the world into a transparent tool set.
And we examine Heidegger's critique of the Cartesian trap, how dividing the world into detached minds and dead objects deepened our amnesia, blinding us to our primordial embeddedness in the world.
We confronted the vertigo of our thrownness, the unchosen nature of our arrival, and how we instinctively flee that vertigo by surrendering to the numbing comfort of Das Man.
And finally, we saw how the breakdowns of our tools, the creeping unease of angst, and the resolute anticipation of our own finite deadline can shatter the cultural autopilot, allowing the raw mystery of being to shine through the cracks.
So what does a listener actually do with this? Philosophy of this density can feel like a heavy weight to carry back into a normal Tuesday afternoon.
The goal isn't to walk around in a constant state of existential dread. The takeaway is a fundamental shift in how you process the friction of everyday life.
Oh, so?
The next time a tool breaks, the next time the train is delayed, the router fails, or an unexpected crisis derails your perfectly planned week, don't just react with frustration. Recognize that breakdown as a philosophical invitation.
An invitation to wake up.
Yes, it is a moment where the veil of the familiar is momentarily lifted. It is a chance to step off the autopilot of Das Man and consciously experience the sheer improbability of your own presence in the world.
It is about learning to tolerate the tension between the familiar and the mysterious without rushing to pave over it with distraction.
Beautifully said.
I want to leave you with one final thought to let simmer as you go about the rest of your day. We spent a lot of time on Heidegger's concept of thrownness, the indisputable reality that not a single one of us chose the historical era we were born into, the biological constraints of our bodies, or the deep cultural programming we inherited.
We all spawn into an incredibly chaotic server that we didn't design.
Exactly. If human existence is fundamentally defined by this shared thrownness, how does internalizing that reality alter the way we look at the people around us? If every single person you interact with today is just desperately trying to navigate and make sense of a complex, pre-existing matrix they were thrown into without their consent, perhaps this deep philosophical mystery isn't just a path to personal awe.
It's a profound shift in perspective.
Maybe realizing that we are all stranded in the same unchosen miracle is the ultimate, unshakable foundation for radical empathy. Look around the room you are in right now. Take it all in one last time. The light, the space, the noise. It isn't just the default setting. It is a brute, wondrous gift. And you are here,